Good evening, good evening, good evening. It's that time of the week. It's a Wednesday at 7 o'clock. It's the only show talking about all things landlording in Alberta, the Alberta Landlord Shoptalk show. I am one of your hosts, Mackenzie Wilson, along to my, appears to be my left, Chris Noble. Chris, how you doing tonight?
Hey, buddy, pretty good. Just stopped by the pub here and decided to set up the show and see how it goes.
You know, give that another 24 hours, that'll be illegal what you're doing right now.
It'll be illegal.
Drinking indoors at a restaurant.
Yeah, actually, I went to a restaurant today and heard that. I guess we're going back to another lockdown. I have been out of touch with the media and what's going on. So
yeah, Mr. Kennedy announced 4:30 yesterday that we're going into more of a lockdown phase with these variant COVID strains out there. So yeah, it's still these interesting times. We're well into a year of being in this pandemic. So. Well, let's segue this conversation. I don't think that's really the focus of tonight's conversation. I'm very, very excited for this conversation. And Chris, kudos to you for, I think this, usually we kind of work together and bring up the ideas, but this one was all you. You reached out when we're talking with one of our partners, Brad Longeway over at Serv-it. And it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So before I give the rabbit, you should talk about it. What are we going to talk about tonight, Chris?
Well, I'd just like to say, so anybody who's joining in right now, if you want to know anything about serving documents and what is the right way of doing things, this is a show you want to join, and you need to go and tag a few people, let them know about this show, because we want to make it interactive. We're going to make, perhaps as we go here tonight, we're going to share a few challenges out there. See who can find some stuff on the Residential Tenancy Act. And if you don't have one, I've got one right here. Mackenzie, you got yours with you?
You know what? It's
right there. Look. I see it right there. I knew it was right there. And those of you who've got a little iPad or something next to you, or a phone, go and look up PDF it, the Alberta Residential Tenancy Act, and bring it up and have it on your phone and being able to flip through it, because we're going to challenge you guys here on a few things of where you find things. Now, you've heard Mackenzie and I talk over time about this is your Bible, this is your saving grace. And I've kind of affectionately joked around that you should take it to bed at night, instead of reading a book, read through that thing and see if you can figure out some of the lingo. Because there are some sections that will save your bacon in there. And we've had other shows where we've talked to other landlords in other provinces. And you know what? We're in good shape, people. The stuff that Ontario's going through, I don't know how they're staying in business down there. I would have took my keys in, dropped them on the banker's desk, and said, "See ya."
Yeah, I'm going to quickly segue and go completely off track, but only for 10 seconds. I just, on that note or point, I posted an article in Mighty Networks today. There is a tenant union, a union for tenants out in Ontario that they are advocating, and a landlord essentially lost a court case for not negotiating a payment plan because of COVID and missed payments and all this kind of good stuff. He was willing to talk to the tenant, but because he didn't want to engage with this tenant union, the tenant board in Ontario awarded an additional a payment plan that the tenant can pay back by April 2023, and that's currently $5,000 in arrears going back to the middle of last year, and this tenant now can pay to 2023. That's, anyways, just completely mind-boggling. The fact that they now are starting to merge with a union over there is some scary stuff, something to keep an eye on. But fortunately for us, we're not in those waters right now.
Yeah, no, we got to be careful for sure. We're in good shape here. Just follow the book here. Our legislation is not set up for either side to lose. Our legislation is set up for either side to follow the rules. And if you follow the rules, you'll win every time. It's what I've talked about in the past. If you bend the rules, you change it because your heart says to, or you start changing it because of your compassion. You know what? Sometimes that works, and good on you. But I will tell you, when it backfires, it's a mess. And absolutely. Brad's going to talk about that when we get him in here. So why don't we bring Brad in right now?
Well, let's warm it up 1 second. I'm going to say hi, Lewis. Let's get some people in here. I know we got some people on right now. If you guys are watching, just drop us a note and say hi. I've got a Facebook user saying hello as well. But this is a really cool conversation. I know I'm going to learn lots tonight because there's a lot of gray area that with Brad's experience, being a bailiff, being on the RTDRS, he's been in the hearings. He's going to really give us some practical advice around all these notifications and that we talk about with regards to the RTA and stuff that I wouldn't say I took for granted. I thought I knew. I'm going to know a whole nother level better. I think it's really going to benefit the audience tonight. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Without further ado, here's Mr. Brad Longeway. Am I saying your last name correct, Brad?
Longeway. Yep. Longeway.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Perfect. Fantastic, Brad. Super excited. Oh, we got Brenda on right now. Hey, Brenda. And she's actually just waiting to do a showing right in the thick of the day-to-day business. Love it, Brenda. A previous guest on our show as well. So this is a cool conversation. And we were talking in the virtual studio about there's just, we'll call it gray area or just a lot of not well-defined areas of the legislation that is open to interpretation if done reasonably right or correct. And I just think it's going to be a very interesting conversation, Brad. So, where do we want to take this? Do you want to, let's just paint us a picture. Tell us what we're going to talk about tonight when we say practical application of proper notifications. What do you mean by that?
I guess the thing that landlords need to consider is there's a specific requirement under the law, and then there's the practical side of getting information or notice to the tenant. One thing I think is really important to consider is when we're talking about service, we're talking in three different areas. The first is pursuant to the RTA. Then when you go into court, you've got their rules, which are different. And if that's RTDRS, their rule is different. Then when you get your order, that's a Court of Queen's Bench order. Their rules are different. So you really have to consider that there's different service allowed at different stages. And I think one thing that landlords are really suffering from confusion on right now is, well, if I can serve the RTDRS order by email and I can serve the RTDRS application and I can serve the order that they grant by email under some circumstances, which I can clarify, why can't I serve a notice to increase rent or serve a notice to enter by email? And that's the thing to really, really think about and understand is the Residential Tenancy Act, I've got mine here too, it doesn't contemplate, is the term they use, email service, so you can't. So the thing that I really want to always express to landlords is if it's just communication, like, so for example, DocuSign leases, that's totally allowable. And I've tested it many times at the RTDRS and never have they rejected anything that was DocuSign. They not once have said it, you have to sign it in person. Mm-hmm. But for your notices that you're compelling something onto a tenant, such as an increase of rent, notice to terminate, let's say if the landlord's moving in, notice to enter, those have to follow specifically the Residential Tenancies Act rules. There's no allowance at this time for email of that. But that's when we get to the practical application. Sure, you post it on the door, but you should always follow up, in my opinion, by text, by email, by some other form of electronic and trackable communication so that there's no doubt they got it. That on its own isn't good enough, but it helps supplement your argument. I evicted a guy on Sunday that claimed that we never served him. I can go into all the details of all the different times we served him. He waited till I came as a bailiff to remove him and claim that. Doesn't matter. The police removed him. But so you're susceptible to people claiming they didn't get it. So as much as you can always supplement proper service as per the Act by email, definitely do that.
Okay. I want to highlight. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
No, I'm good. I'm just keeping track of people here. So you.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna highlight.
Go right ahead.
Okay, I want to highlight two things. You got me thinking here, Brad, and I think this is really intriguing conversations. So you mentioned this is something we've preached before on the show, which I'm just going to quickly highlight, and then we'll go to the next point. Was layering your communication mediums. You just don't rely on one single medium of messaging, where taping that notice to the door. Yes, that's the primary way it's specified in the RTA for most notifications when you say compelling. But you're also saying follow up the text in an email. You've got 3 points of contact there. You're completely reducing the odds. And can you describe that part where you talk about the balance of odds or probability when we're doing these different tasks?
So the hearing officers are going to rule. The burden of proof is on the applicant, and typically the burden of proof is on the landlord. We have the we come from the advantage. Let's say we create the leases, we control the situation more. So the hearing officers are going to rule on the balance of probabilities. And so let's say you give a tenant a notice to increase rent, you tape it to the door and you take a picture of it, and the tenant says, I never got it. I absolutely never got it. Usually the hearing officer is going to side with you. It's yeah, sure. I bet there's a landlord out there that's taped it to the door and then taken a picture and then ripped it down. But if you've then layered that, as you use that term, I'm going to start using that, by emailing a tenant saying, hey, here's a copy of the notice that I posted to your door,
attach that picture of it on the door. Exactly. So it's like
a copy of the notice, copy of the picture. I've had many hearings where the hearing officer said to the tenant flat out, if you didn't get it, why didn't you respond to that email that the landlord sent you? And I brought that up saying, sometimes the hearing officer does, sometimes I have, where I've said, you can see the email chain with the tenants. They reply when the landlord sends them an email, and their next reply to the rent increase might have been something a month later. There's no doubt they got it. And so the hearing officers will hold that against them to say, you ought to then have replied and said, I didn't get it. What are you talking about? And so that helps us. If nothing else, it helps just move the claim forward. Even if the hearing officer is going to rule in your favor, it makes the tenant even less likely to make that claim. Sometimes what happens in a hearing is, you've got to have 10 things go right to be successful. You get through 9 and number 10 shuts you down. Don't let that be one of them. So as much as you can minimize any opportunity the tenant has for you to step on a landmine, do that. And it's redundancy to a point. The thing that I want to point out to people is when you look in the Residential Tenancies Act, when it gets to service of notices, it's on page 50. It's way deep in there. So a lot of landlords don't get that far. So they go through the section on notices to terminate, but it doesn't say how you have to do it until you get way further in. And so a lot of landlords have assumptions, and fairly so, that you can email just about everything now. And I truly believe that when they update this act, email will be the preferred form of service. But this act is antiquated. It's outdated in terms of modern communication. And until they do, this act is from 2004. So, it just, they need to change it. And I think it's going to happen in the next few years. But until they do, you have to make sure you comply with the old school way of posting certain notices to the door.
So let's take that a step back. And Chris, do you want to jump in here as we continue on? Because I know you had some burning topics as well. Or do you want me to? Let me wrap up this point, and then you jump in. So don't be afraid to talk here, Chris. I know you're getting things organized in the back, and we've got some questions we're taking off the page as well. But Brad, you talked about a compelling event, and what exactly does that mean? Because I kind of get, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page for that, because that's kind of a really important point when you're talking about these certain notices, talking about raising the rents, notice to terminate, and maybe a few other things.
There's certain notices that in order for you to exercise, they have to be done precisely right. So what first one I'll talk about that doesn't, truthfully, is the 14-day notice to terminate. You don't have to give a notice to terminate before you go to RTDRS. You don't have to give one before you go to Court of Queen's Bench. I don't utilize provincial court. I know in Red Deer and Lethbridge, a lot of landlords do, and it works well. Calgary, avoid it like the plague. Calgary, they make it difficult actually to be a landlord. They'll hear 2 a week on Friday afternoon is the last update I had. So perhaps there's people out there that could comment and tell me. But my understanding is if you want to go to provincial court in Red Deer, let's say, you have to have given a valid notice to terminate, and I may be wrong. But the point is at RTDRS, you don't. So if you give an invalid, I would say probably 50% of the notices to terminate that I see from, I'll say, non-corporate landlords have something wrong with them. But that's okay, because it's showing your intent. You're showing a hearing officer, before coming here, I gave him a notice. I was hoping they'd move. They didn't. That's why we're here. So that's fine that it didn't quite follow it right. But certain other notices, such as a notice to increase rent, has to be done precisely right. There is no margin for error. If you don't do it right, it's not valid. You can't raise the rent. You'd have to give a new notice. A notice to enter, if that's not done precisely right, you technically could be trespassing if you enter that property. Okay. So it's just really, really important that those notices that, it's not an agreement. Like when you make a lease with a tenant or you renew a lease, that's an agreement. You're making that together. That can be by email or by any form of communication. It can technically be verbal under the RTA, not ideal, but allowable. But a notice to enter can't be verbal. It has to be, and the thing to point out to people, read the section of the act that talks about service, registered mail, personal, posted to the door, even faxed if they have a fax machine, but not emailed.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take off. You kind of raised some really good points there, and I want to kind of circle back and try to get my composing my thoughts. So yeah, 14-day notice, not even needed. And I love that you clarify that, because we see that conversation happen a lot in the community. And the times that we do suggest doing it is if you don't have a lot of empirical evidence that your tenant's not paying rent on time. Well, now you've served 1, 2, or 3 of these, and now you've built up a very strong, basically bulletproof case to go to RDS to get that person out. But if you already have other evidence that's well documented, like you said, Brad, 14-day notice, not even required.
Well, and one thing I do want to emphasize is when a landlord calls me and says, should I give a notice? I say, what are you trying to achieve? And do you think it will work? And if the answer is no, don't bother. If you come to me and say, well, they're 3 months behind on rent, don't bother. It's too late. You're just giving them more time. But if they're 1 month behind, I typically will recommend giving a notice to terminate. It doesn't stop the hearing, but it can influence it, but it's case by case. So again, it depends what you're looking to achieve. I'll have landlords come in and just a stack of notices to terminate. And once you've given 1 or 2 over a few months, escalate it. Give them a demand letter instead, or some sort of demand to pay. Show an escalation, so maybe the tenant will take you a little bit more serious.
Okay.
A lot of older tenants believe you have to give a notice to terminate, and if they pay it within the 14 days, it's fine. Don't play into their game.
Okay. Hey, Christine, thanks for joining us. We had Bill from Lethbridge as well, and a Facebook user said, hi, Brad. Hi, Facebook user.
Oh, I'm going to go find out for you who Brad's fan is. It's Kathy Heist.
Oh, perfect. I was actually talking to Kathy today. Actually, she's maybe in the future she might come on the show. She's one of our very experienced landlords on the page, and we were chatting about some other stuff on a side note. But yeah, okay. So let's. I know, Chris, you're kind of excited about this topic, abandonment. Let's take a turn that way and talk about, Chris, what are some of the challenges? We've seen this question come up on the page a few times, and it's if not handled correctly with the right paperwork, you can get yourself into some trouble. So where were you going with this, Chris?
Okay, so I had a chat with Rob Bonin, and everybody knows Rob. He's our Mr. Personality on our page. I love that guy. He does a lot of digging, and I have to give him a lot of credit. He's not afraid to take on Service Alberta, and he's found out some great stuff, and he is he's not afraid to call a spade and get it straightened out. So he's gotten some great letters to support this group and carry on here. So what Rob and I were talking about was the abandonment issue. What he's discovering, as he actually chatted with a clerk at the court on something he was talking about. That comment there, great topics, comes from Shauna Lee Jessamine. So,
cool. Hey, Shauna Lee.
I'm not sure why we sometimes can see people's name and sometimes can't, but anyway. So anyway, get back to this topic. So the clerk told him that the judges, what they're doing, they're saying, what people are saying is this: you're showing up to the house on the 5th of the month, and you haven't got any notice or anything, and because you haven't got rent, you haven't heard from them, they won't contact you. So you show up and you look in, and the place is a mess, but clearly the furniture is gone. There's a few papers strewn about. So you go in, you go, wow, you better go in and inspect. So you slip in to inspect. You see clearly there's no beds, there's no dressers. The place is gone. You check with the neighbors. They've moved out. And then you change the locks, and you serve papers to collect your rent and any cleanup costs. And it got into court, and they're saying, yeah, we left, but our intention was to clean it, but they changed the locks. So we couldn't get in to clean it. So we don't think we should be responsible for the locks because the landlord went ahead and changed things. And I know we were a bit late, but we were going to pay up the month's rent. So they kind of set themselves up with the judge. So what Rob and I chatted about, and Brad, I think this plays into what you're talking about proper documentation and leaving a trail of best practices here, is that if you come upon your place in this manner and it's clearly abandoned, but the game's going to get played here because now you've taken them to court. If you're going to go ahead and change the locks, then what you have to do is post some information on how you can be reached: emails, phone numbers, text, addresses, whatever is taken, whatever it takes to say, look, I've attended the residence, you hadn't paid, this is what I see. Now you want to post that on the inside so it's clearly out, whether you put it on some windows where you can't get by without seeing it, you put it on 2 doors, but you need to go the extra step. And that includes what Brad had said earlier: emailing people, texting pictures of things, so that when you go to court and you say, well, I just went there and it looked like it was abandoned, so I changed the locks, the judge has to weigh on the balance of probabilities. And he said he sees now that this renter saying, well, yeah, I know I left and my intent was to clean it. And you're going, you don't have anything to disprove that. You don't have any trail showing what your intention was to make sure that there's a proper communication. There's very little onus, it seems, by the courts to place it back on the renter. They were non-communicative to you. They can say, well, yeah, I reached out but never heard anything, which, is a bunch of BS. This is why you have to have this trail in place. And what Rob was saying simply was that the judge are believing the tenants and ruling in the favor of the tenant. So you may not get everything you're asking for.
So let's throw this back to Brad. And I want to paint this in 2 different scenarios and give us some clarity of how we can prevent this happening to yourself, so you don't get caught in this trap where you lose out and you lose a claim where if the house is messy, you can't claim those cleaning costs. So Brad, you mentioned this earlier in the show. Us as landlords, typically we're driving most of this process. We treat this as a day-to-day business. Therefore, typically it's viewed probably both in RTDRS and in the courts that we should be held to a higher standard because this is our business. Whereas tenants may come and go and choose a rent here and there, it's our onus to be more diligent, right? Okay. So let's paint the scenario what Chris just said. Someone comes in, it appears abandoned, landlord takes it over, and then files with RTS, and then they lose out on the cleaning costs. Why did that happen, and how can we avoid that?
Well, and there's something even, I think, more important to add than just something like cleaning, for example, and that's abandoned possessions. Because we see that quite a bit too, where they're not going to take the old bed and they're not going to take the old couch, but they're now going to lay a trap for you as a landlord to try and make it that not only do they not want to pay to dispose of it, you now have to, but now they want to be paid to be compensated for their goods because you illegally threw them away because you illegally changed the lock. So consider that as well, that's where I see it more often. But the number one thing that I've been telling landlords for years and years and years, if you come upon your property and it appears abandoned, I want to change the locks right away. It's vulnerable, especially depending where it is. But an abandoned property, vacant property is vulnerable. So secure it, change the locks. The act, actually, when my head was down, I was looking for where in the act it actually says, the landlord has reasonable belief. I couldn't quite find it, but it's saying to the effect of the landlord has reasonable belief that the tenant has vacated the property, that they may take possession of it, of course, without an order. So take possession of the property, seal it up, lock the windows, lock the doors. Okay. But the number one tip that I recommend to a landlord is then put a note on the door detailing to the tenant, and put it in an envelope. Don't lay it open so that, you're advertising anybody walking down the place is empty, but, put in an envelope. I got my bag here. For my job, I carry envelopes with me 100% of the time. Write a note to them and say, hey, we believe you've abandoned. We have changed the locks and secured the property. If you have not abandoned the property or need to come back to recover any possessions or clean, notify us. We will make sure you either get access back in the property if you haven't abandoned, which I've never had that happen once where they actually came back and said, I didn't get out, theoretically.
You basically called the bluff, right?
Yeah. Yep. And then the other, and if you need access for any other possessions and cleaning, please notify. Absolutely, we'll arrange that with you. And then, as you said, layering it, text that to them, email that to them, anything that you can get to them, because now on a balance of probabilities, you're set up so much better when a hearing officer says, well, okay, you said you're going to come back and clean, but well, here's an email from him that says, let's pretend the tenant says there wasn't an envelope on the door. Somebody must have ripped it off the door. I hear that all the time. Well, how about the email that we've used as evidence? It says right in there, hey, Joe, where'd you go? Come, you need back in. And they, it'll make you far, far, far more successful in recovery. But as a bailiff, when we're involved, it's more often less surprising that they've abandoned, but more often than they've had to move quickly and left a lot of possessions behind. And that's where I've seen many times where the landlord's not sure if they vacated or not. And so I give you honest advice, don't hire me as a bailiff to come evict them technically from an abandoned property. Change the locks, put the note. But if the tenant calls you and says, I didn't move out, yeah, you better let me back in. Call me, we'll race down there as a bailiff, we'll enforce it. And now you can say, too bad, so sad, you can't come in. It's never happened once, not once. Every time I've suggested to a landlord to put that notice on the door, the tenant didn't come back and say, yeah, no, I'm not out. So
that's a great pro tip.
100%. I'm not kidding. When landlords have put that notice on the door, we batted 100% on success for recovery of that. And that's the thing to remember. There are so many of these tenants that know so many dirty tricks. And, I really, really preach that the tenants are our partners. They're, don't treat them as the enemy. Even if your last tenant was horrible, the new tenant might be better. Hopefully they are. But there are certain tenants out there that,
know the system and they'll play it. But but like you said, 9 times out of 10, we're all here wanting the good place to rent or provide a good rental. We're looking for that kind of relationship to mutually benefit each other. But unfortunately, there's a select few, the bad apples that we come across that make it the nightmare where we see these conversations on our page. They are few and far between, but since we're a community of a couple thousand landlords across Alberta, these seem to be more prevalent more prevalent when they're really not. But I think the great pro tip that you shared there, Brad, was you're in a situation where you possibly have abandonment or you do have abandonment. You're going to likely have cleaning costs, junk removal costs, a bunch of this other stuff. But if you don't paste a little bit of documentation, providing the communication to allow that tenant to come back, have some recourse to provide the services they say they will, when in fact we know we're all getting bluffed here. You're just doing a great paper trail. So when you're in court, you don't get those costs thrown out, and you get them stuck in with the judgment. And
one thing to add to that too, even if they abandon, you still have to do a move-out inspection. You still have to notify them of the 2 dates and times that you're proposing a move-out inspection. You have to. It doesn't matter. And so post out on the door too. Email that to them, text that to them as well, so that you can also make the argument for damages that you gave them their technical right to participate in that. So totally. A lot of landlords think if they've abandoned or they've been kicked out by bailiff that you don't have to do that. And it's very important that you do. That is one of the technicalities. Really and honestly, in Alberta, I think we have a really, really good act compared to many of the other ones I'm familiar with. There's not a lot of technicalities that we really have to follow. Many other provinces, if you don't do something exactly right, you start back over at stage 1. Our system's really forgiving. But there's a few things that are very precise, and that's increase in rent, that's your move in, your move outs, very precise. You've got to do those right. Otherwise, you're really going to hurt your return. And the thing that I want to stress to a lot of landlords is don't think the system is broken because you didn't get what you're asking for. Most of the time when we see it is that you just didn't document well, or you didn't know what you needed to do, or you fell for the bait of a tenant. I see that regularly. And so that's why something like this is so great. Because it used to be when a landlord would come to my office and they'll say, "Oh, I'll never make that mistake again." I say, "Well, if you got 5 more minutes, I'll tell you about the next 4 you'll probably make." Because we see those. Now the landlords are free from that because of forums like this where they can reach out and get information so much quicker. And I just think it's great.
Okay, let's go back. Let's
just interject here. Let's lots of talk, and it gets some great talk and some great information. But let's package this up neat and tidy here. So I'm going to give the scenario. We're going to give you an ABCD list here. All right. So you come to your property, it's abandoned. So you are going to write a list of things in a letter. And you're going to post this letter on the door. You're going to tape it to the door with the tenant's name on it, both tenants, however many there are, with their names directly on it.
Names, in the letter, dates.
Name. Yeah, okay. So the letter is going to be addressed to the tenant. It's going to be pasted or taped duct taped if you want, or package tape, whatever. It's going to be on the door. Okay. So now inside that letter, you're going to say the following things. One is this, and we're going to keep this very chronological and simple. One is, I attended this property on this date because of these reasons. The reasons being, I haven't heard from you, I haven't received your rent, and upon doing that, I found the place that appeared to be abandoned. Number one reason, right? So you've set it up, that's abandoned. What I did was, and you're upfront with them, I have changed the locks because of the appearance of this place being abandoned, and I cannot seem to reach you. Number two reason.
Secure the property, which is, I think, the words you're using, right, Brad?
Yeah. Yeah.
And appearance is a good way to put that. I like that.
Yeah. And as a result, I have secured the property. Here's key words. These are buzzwords when you get to court, people, to keep your contents safe.
Position for the tenant. Love it.
You're positioning yourself to look good. All right. And you know what? This is being an ethical landlord. You want, not only you want to say, okay, if you're an asshole, whatever, you're trying to make yourself look good and you want to go to court, you want to look good. So you want to do the right things. All right. So now you've made yourself look good. I wanted to secure your goods. All right. So you've done that and you've gone in, you've checked up. Then what's going to happen is you're going to list, here is how you can reach me because I'm unable to reach you. You're going to give what, Brad? A phone number, an email, an address.
More than one way to communicate. That's probably what
an alternate contact. Yeah. And if you're old school, here's my fax number. Okay. So here's five ways that you can reach out to me. Okay. Are you looking pretty good so far? Absolutely you are. All right. Now you have communication abilities. You've had communication abilities with this person. So you are going to, in this letter, you're going to take a picture of it and you're going to email this letter to your tenant, or you're going to text this picture of this letter to the tenant.
All of the above, whatever you can.
Yep. All of the above. And you're going to get it to them and you're going to make notes that this is what you've done. Okay. So now you're setting yourself up to show yourself as being communicative and willing to work with somebody. All right. So now we've set this picture up really good. So now you're not hearing from these people. And you're how many weeks in when we say at this point, because you haven't heard from them? Set the scenario up. Let's make it easy.
And that I don't want to give ever too precise of a timeline because each case is its own. It's about reasonableness. And it depends on what you see, what you know about your tenant. I mean, if you've got a tenant that works out of town regularly, it's going to be a little bit longer. If you got a tenant on, Aish and just never leaves his house, shorter period of time. Depends on what the contents are. I saw the one person posted about taking pictures. I mean, please take tons of pictures, but that's another good point. It can be really hard to tell sometimes. And typically what I say to a landlord is call me, let's talk about it. But one thing to go back to is, okay, so there's two issues at hand in my mind. One is abandonment, and are they going to claim they're still living there? And two is what possessions are left. So I'm quicker to say re-rent it, clean it, move on within days to a week if it appears abandoned, so that you can cut your losses and try and move forward. But if you have a bunch of possessions in there, and we're talking old couches, big stuff, typically we see stuff that is garbage, but you don't want to quite throw it away yet. What I always say to a landlord is, does it inhibit your ability to renovate or re-rent the place? So, for example, I've got a lot of landlords that just want to throw it away right away, just get rid of it. And I get that urge, okay. But consider that if it's April 8th and you don't have somebody moving until April 30th and you found somebody and you got the couch in the bed all piled in the garage or whatever, why can't they stay there another week or two longer?
Exactly. So what we're setting up here is this. You have goods, and we've heard just a few minutes ago where they've claiming that this $50 couch is worth $500. Right? So we're going to find a place to store this stuff, whether you have a garage, a shop, a shed, or something you can do to store it.
Expensive tarp.
And an expensive tarp. Yeah. But you know what? Again, it's setting yourself up. So, and in the meantime, you're working to get your RTDS rolling. So you are preparing all this, boom, you're getting these documents served electronically, whatever means are out there to have this served. But when you do go to the hearing, you've said, these are all the things I've done. So their $500 couch, well, here's the picture of the couch that I have in storage. It's not missing, it's in storage, and they can come and get it. This is what I've done. This is what I've posted. Here's all the ways they could have reached out to me. So now you've shown that you have been more than willing to work here, and you've got a new renter in, you've got it cleaned up. What's going to happen next? They're going to say, well, we tried to reach him, but he wouldn't return our calls. This person just gave you 4 different ways to reach out to them, and you didn't use it. So I know it's a lot of work, but when you finally get that good renter in there, all of a sudden your whole effort and time that you've had to put in, and the money's coming in, and everything's ready and everything's good, and you've followed the Alberta landlord community ways of doing things, you've got your good renters, it'll all pay itself back, people. Just work on doing it right.
Yeah.
Play the game the best way you can here and set yourself up for the win. Go the extra mile. Don't get frustrated and throw it to the wind and hope for the best, because you might as well write it off at that point. Do what we're telling you, set it up, contact one of us, contact Brad, Rob, or Don, and they will help set this up for you. And money well spent by talking to these gentlemen and getting coached by them and getting this set up. I would turn it over to them, let them do it for you. Or at least, get a little guidance and a little coaching, and it's money well spent for, $50 worth of advice or $100 worth of advice.
Okay.
That's my recommendation. Do it right.
And if there's one thing that I can add, I've been doing hearings. I've done over 4,000 hearings. I think now I've been doing it, 12 or 13 years. I have seen more lawsuits against landlords in the last 6 months than I have in the last 10 years. The system that has become so accessible for us as landlords, it has become equally as accessible for tenants. And so I'm seeing way more tenants filing claims against landlords. And I can tell you honestly, about a quarter of them, we see the tenant get a reasonable judgment. About 50% of them, we've been able to get completely dismissed. And about 25% of them, we've actually counterclaimed where the landlord actually got a judgment. So a lot of what you're doing might not even be about recovery. When you're filing your own claim, it might just be about not taking the tenant's bait so that they feel more empowered and entitled perhaps to file a claim against you that may or may not have any merit. By, that note on the door might be, crap, now we can't sue him and pretend that we had a Picasso in the unit because he's made it available to us. So a lot of this, even if you have no intention of ever filing a claim, because we all know the truth of the likelihood of collection from a tenant is so low, that, consider that it might not be about pursuing a judgment against the tenant, but just preventing the nuisance of having to defend a claim. And I mean, ask the other guys, I'm blown away by how many claims we're seeing against landlords these days. And truthfully, we've had a lot of fun with some of them, I'll admit, because, a few of them are tenants that you just had no right. They had no right filing a claim. I had a guy recently who
poke the bear, just try me.
He owed the landlord $7,000. He filed a claim, and I pointed out a bunch of lies he told, and the hearing officer in the end said, sir, you have no credibility. Your entire claim is dismissed. He should have got a few small abatements. There was a couple of hero backups and a few other issues. He should have got a few small abatements that would have offset part of the $7,000 he owed, but he got nothing because he lied and abused the system. Yeah. And
using the system.
And truthfully, the landlord didn't have a lot of the pictures and things that I would have liked to have had, but we didn't need it. The tenant tripped over himself. So just consider that the tenant might have a different motive.
So Mac, I want to, since we're talking about doing the right thing and doing it the best we can, I want to run into this scenario that I had here just in Lacombe, just 2 days ago. So a lady called me up, says, Chris, I don't know how to deal with this. My tenant has COVID, confirmed. I was talking to him. He said, I'll call you back. The nurses are coming in. And from that point on, she hasn't heard from him. She has since learned through family that he's now intubated and he has been sedated so that he can rest, and she doesn't know if he's going to live.
Is this the ICU one?
Yeah, he's in the ICU. He's intubated.
So
and
COVID,
sedated.
ICU.
Up in Fort McMurray of all places. And, because being so far away. So she said, what do I do? I said, well, you know what? For insurance purposes, your insurance, requires that the place is checked on, and you need. So you know what? You're going to go check on the place. And I said, did they have any family members that you can reach out to? She goes, no, I don't know anybody. And I said, fair enough. I said, so what we're going to do is we're going to go there. She says, well, he's got an alarm there's an alarm company that has an alarm system there. I said, okay. So she says, I said, contact the alarm company, explain the situation. You're the owner. Well, the alarm company was then less than helpful in the scenario. So they wouldn't help her. So we went there together, and I said, first thing we're doing is we're phoning the police, because the alarm's going to go off and they're going to get notified. So we contacted the Lacombe police and we told them what was happening. And they said, yeah, okay, we'll pop by. And sure enough, the alarm goes off and the police get called, and they come and they show up with one person that's coming there to help us. And then they're coming there because they think there's a break and enter in progress. But anyway, that part got all sorted out. We went in and dealt with all the issues at hand. And she went the extra mile, and I give her a lot of credit. Check the fridge for goods that are going to go bad. And sure enough, there was a lot of green fuzzy stuff because he's been gone so long. And there was a lot of stuff that could go bad that could be frozen. So we took that stuff and we put it in the freezer to freeze it so it could be used.
Did you guys take pictures while you're doing this?
No, because we didn't. That would have been a really good thing to have considered to do. But what we did, because it was like 3 items, the fridge was fairly empty, and it was 2 pieces of bread. We weren't, and there was 2 of us.
Sure, $10 worth of items per se, right? Again, being reasonable here, right?
Yeah. So we're being reasonable and being quite ethical in what we're doing. And we just put the stuff into the freezer because it can be kept and it's not going to go bad. And we did that, and we decided that we were going to turn the water off so she didn't have any leaks and she wouldn't have to worry about water issues because water is all of our nemesis as it is. And then that particular place had a electric hot water tank, so we turned the breaker off and turned the hot water tank off, so that way it doesn't continue to heat and there's continuous pressure in the system. So those are the little things she did. And while she was there, she noted that there was an energy bill there, which fortunately for him, he had both coming through the same company. So she reached out to the company and said, hey, look, this is the situation with the tenant. Should he get into arrears, I am the owner and I would like it put into my name so that you know how to reach me. And so she gave them all that information. And then we went back and secured the residence, and she changed the lock because she doesn't know who has a key, and she's not been notified. So she's changed the lock, and we put there was a note on the door that he had left about the doorbell not working. But what we did is we added an extra line to it. If should you need anything, contact, and put her name and her phone number on there, and it's on the door so that anyone coming there can see it clearly and can reach out to her. So if there's some family that's coming. So now what she's done is she's gone and she's protected her tenant's interests. She's got a very good relationship with him. He's been there, I think, 5 years. And she's looking after his stuff. And when he gets out, if something happens to him, the next person she's going to end up talking to would be the executive of a estate. And then she'll work with that person and take direction accordingly. But now she has control over her property and protection of her tenants' things, and they have a very good relationship as a result of that.
Perfect.
So
cool.
It's working together, and and with my background and knowing how to communicate to authorities what's going on, and we just all work together, and it's all very well documented with the police and everybody else what's going on, and so there's no way really for this to go sideways, except if he gets mad because she went in there. But she's well within her rights to go and inspect the property and secure it. So,
Go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, but I mean, I give her credit for changing the locks because it is really thinking about his stuff, but it is helping her too. Because what if some squatter, somebody decides I'm going to move into whoever's house?
Take advantage of the situation.
We actually had that recently with the landlord. They moved back when COVID started. They moved back to England. And a friend of their son's moved into the property in Airdrie, and he's claiming he's renting from them and got all these claims. And they were getting ready for us to go out. I'd gone out and done kind of an inspection of the outside and confirmed somebody was still living there. And we were getting ready to file a claim, and something happened. He passed away. Not sure what, but so they took possession.
The son in the apartment, or the person back in England?
So the family back in England, but the son's friend just decided to hire a locksmith, pick the lock. I don't know, but he just moved in. Yeah. And so now they got a squatter. And so in a case like that, exactly, you don't know who have keys and, take advantage of a vulnerable situation and move in. And, so it'd be how would I put it? Few and far cases in between where I think this would backfire versus really, really benefit her and protect her investment, protect the property as well as the tenant's possession. So I think it's definitely the right thing to do. And again, the thing too is he's immediately available to him or, representative of him. So she's not denying him access. She's saying the locks are chain secure, but here's the key.
Yeah, and you can do that. It says right in the RTA. Forgive me, I don't know. I can't recall the section. You can change the locks as long as access is provided to the other party. Yeah. Both the tenant and the landlord can do this.
Yep.
So
now I had another call. Oddly enough, by the evening, another local one here where a lady's having trouble with the tenant paying on time. And she went over to speak to the tenant about it, and he was verbally abusive to her and was just nasty. And she says, look, your rent's due and you haven't paid up your damage deposit as per the contract we've written up. You're supposed to be paying that as well. And he hasn't done that yet. And she hasn't enforced it. So she's setting herself up for some difficulties for sure. And interestingly enough, the grandmother of the young fellow that's renting from her walked up to her when she was getting to leave in her vehicle and said, you have lots of money. Why don't you cut him a break? And I said, I wish I was there with you because I would have looked at grandma and I would have said, I'm sure you do. So why don't you pay his bills? But with that said, we're now in a scenario with her is because she has a written contract for paying the damage deposit. So she has something in writing for that. It wasn't, we'll pay it later. We're going to go down an avenue where whatever she received this month as rent, she's going to apply that to damage deposit. We're going to try this, see if it'll fly, and give him a notice that his rent is due. And I'm sure if grandma gets involved, she can write the check for the rent. But she would really prefer that he's gone because she really wants to sell the place. And the place, I saw some pictures of it pre-rental, and it was actually quite a nice place. So she's going to... she needs him gone, and he's being very difficult. So we're probably going to file him with a very large rental increase. So he'll be looking for a new place because he's slipped into a month-to-month rather than a lease. So
okay. Well, okay. So there's two things I want to touch on quickly. We're wrapping up about the last mile of the show here. Let's go quickly, Brad. You said there's two situations you have to be very precise in how you handle the proper notice. Could you walk us through those two scenarios and just lay out what is needed to execute or action those precise notifications? I think you said one was a rent increase.
Yep.
And so let's talk about that. And this is talking about a scenario of a month-to-month situation and doing a rent increase. Okay, so take it away.
So consider that, as we discussed earlier offline, was if you got a fixed term, you're just negotiating a new fixed term. You don't need to give a notice to increase the rent. But if you've got a periodic month-to-month tenancy, rent hasn't gone up in over a year, and you're giving notice, I recommend to people to have a good bundle of forms that you just fill in the blanks. Just speaking in Calgary, the Calgary Residential Rental Association has a really good bundle of forms. A lot of the ones that you can print off online are not specific to Alberta, and they are not adequate. Some are, some aren't. So look in the act, read the act. So you want to increase the rent, pull out the act, read what it says you have to do. But basically it has to be in writing, has to name the premise, has to detail what the rent's going up to. I mean, there's a few more specifics in there, but you've got that all in writing, has to be signed. And as per the one section 67, I think it is, of the RTA, how you serve these notices, you have to go there, give it to the person. If they're not there, tape it to the door. It does say you can leave it with an adult tenant. I don't recommend that because that adult tenant is going to claim in court that they were an adult guest. So don't. I've seen that backfire.
Pro tip right there.
And then you can follow up by email and text to say this is what I did pursuant to the act, and now the practical application and making sure you see it and are aware of it. You give that to them. The problem that happens is, let's say you give a notice on January 1st to raise the rent for April 1st. So April 1st comes around, they didn't raise the increased rent. You call them April 2nd, say you didn't pay the increase. That's when they point out you didn't serve it right or you didn't prepare it right. You now got to give the notice May, June, July for August 1st. You're actually out 7 months now. from when you first gave the notice, it would have been 3. So it's really critical. You can't email that. So that's where I say take the time, reach out if you haven't done one before, but read the act and make sure that you're doing that right. It's, again, that's not something we see a lot, but the one that I see more often that landlords are doing wrong is the notice to enter. And
let's talk about that.
That cannot be given by text. That cannot be given by email unless the tenant consents to it. So that's an important caveat to add there. If you text your tenant and say, can I come inspect the unit, Tuesday at 2, totally allowable because they have consented. But they can retract that consent at any time, including while you're in the property. I've seen many landlords show up to inspect a property and tenant says, no, change my mind, you can't come in. And you can't compel your way in. So that's where you have to make a business decision. Do you drive across a city that you might be in or to another town to give a notice? If you trust and you've got the relationship with the tenant where they're going to let you in, make that call. But if you've got that problematic tenant, drive there, post that notice to the door, take a picture, text it to them. And then that way, when you come back, if you want in that property, and when I'm involved inspecting properties, usually we want in pretty bad. There's something funny going on inside. We then call the police. So let's say it is not recommended for an inspection that you give a window larger than 4 hours. It's not in writing. This is a
pro tip here.
Just a tip that over time, with kind of what Service Alberta seems to recommend. Yes, you could give an 8-hour window, but it's recommended to give 4. I always do mine from 8 a.m. to noon. I show up at 8. And that way, if they won't let me in, I've got time to call the police to say, will you come keep the peace? It's really important you tell them that. We're not asking you to intimidate the tenant, not asking you to do anything but keep the peace because we're going in and we're afraid that they will prevent.
There could be some malicious
Yeah.
action. Love
and
it.
so
That's
come, show the police, look, here's the notice, here's a picture of it on the door, here's a follow-up email, we're coming in. The police will be very supportive in my experience in letting you go in. But so many tenants are getting wiser these days and they're just making a quick phone call and you show up and they're like, well, no, this wasn't signed or this wasn't dated. And look, it says this and Service Alberta just told me you can't come in and you can't. And I've actually seen landlords fined before because they went in improperly.
okay. So I'm going to recap because you just showed some really good pro tips. Rent increase on a periodic lease, so month-to-month lease, you have to give proper written notice. Just hands down, because that's the process. If you go from term lease to term lease, which is 99, or actually all of us in Alberta as landlords, that is the proper way to do it. And I won't get in the details, but quickly, high level, you have more power. You control the lease. Once you go into a periodic, you have to have a reason to end that tenancy, other than the tenancy term coming to an end. Therefore, there's reasons you have to have those, and those reasons are more powerful for the tenant as opposed to the landlord. We didn't get in the details. So you got to follow that process. And then the notice to entry. I did not know that, Brad, that it can be revoked at any time, even while you're in the property. So explain to me what will happen here.
And if you give notice, they can't, of course. But if the tenant gives you permission to enter, so you just ask your tenant if you can come by and inspect the property, and they say yes. And they could text you, yes, you can come in. And then you show up, and I've seen it 5 minutes before, you can't come in now. You can't, because you're coming in, let's say, as their guest, more or less. You're coming in with their permission.
Right.
You do not have the right to access. And I'll tell you, I've seen many landlords get in trouble because they got a little too pushy and they perhaps entered when they shouldn't. And it's trespassing, technically.
Yeah.
If you went without proper notice.
You've gone to a verbal agreement, which the consent can be withdrawn. And the act says you can do anything you want if you both agree to it.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, if you do it by the book and by the act, and you serve the paper that you're coming in at this time, they can't revoke it. It can't be done.
And one thing, if I can add, I just saw the note about didn't know you can't email for rent increases. One caution. I just helped a landlord who the tenant, it was an improper rent increase, and the tenant waited till the lease was over and came back over a year later and said, you owe me a bunch of money back because you didn't increase the rent rate. And they do. There's certain things that if they do, they accept the term, but that's not one of them because, I didn't know it was an illegal increase. They knew all along. They just didn't say anything. And landlord has to pay it. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it at all.
Interesting.
So let's grab a couple of these questions, Mac, here. I'll bring this first one up here. It says here, what's the difference between a periodic yearly agreement and a fixed term agreement?
Brad, well, you buddy.
Well,
We'll
I
just
would
go
not
short.
yearly.
Sorry,
I would-
Brad, to interrupt you. We're getting short on time, so we'll bang these off quick here. We'll kind of do a rapid fire.
We might do overtime.
I more call it periodic and fixed term. Periodic yearly which sort of implies it renews every year. It's either a month-to-month agreement that the tenant can terminate with 30 or 1 month's notice, or a fixed term where it automatically ends in a certain date. There's also a hybrid lease, but I won't get into that. As an agent, please stick with the fixed term. It will fix so many of your problems that may creep up. You forgot to write no smoking. The tenant starts smoking. You say, stop smoking on my property. You can't, but you got a fixed term. You can end it at the end of the fixed term.
Right. And if you want to keep the guy and you want to adjust the new contract, you can say, now there's no more smoking in my property.
Yeah. If you don't quit smoking, I will not be renewing your lease in 3 months or whatever. And it gives you leverage. Yeah. Fixed term only, especially if you're an inexperienced landlord, please fixed term only. Even if you don't know why, just trust us.
Yeah. So Olafans, Kathy writes here, I don't know why landlords offer to make payment arrangements on damage deposits. A landlord should get the full month's rent deposited upfront and make payments on rent. Then they can even charge late fees or evict if necessary. So here's a good question. They got to move in April 1st. It's March. Come April 1st comes in, they've moved in. They've not paid you the damage deposit, and now they're into their lease. Can you go back and collect on that, Brad?
No. If it's in writing that you have a payment plan to pay the damage deposit, we have been successful in getting that added to a conditional order as part of a payment plan, but that seems to be going away a little bit. If they can only pay one or the other, and I understand why landlords choose to let them in. It's about getting somebody in the property. And you say, okay, you're going to pay the security deposit later, but pay me the rent now. Please don't do it the other way. Say pay the security deposit and then pay your rent later, because the rent can be part of a payment plan. But once the tenant occupies that premises, you cannot compel them to pay the security deposit. And again, little caveat, if you have in writing $500 a month on the 15th for the next 2-3 months, sure. I've been successful with that in the past, but I would still avoid that. One or the other, take the security deposit up rent or up front, let the rent pay later if you're choosing to let them in.
So, Chris, do you want to add on that play? How do you approach that situation when you're talking deposits and first month's rent?
I'm a hard ass. Rent and damage deposit due. End of story.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to go back to my old days of jail. When you got a guy who hasn't paid a fine and he owes $2,875 for driving his car for no insurance or 60 days in jail, do you know what? They probably spend at the most till the morning in jail, and somehow $2,875 comes in and they're a free man. So you know what? If people want it, they can do it. And you have to ask yourself, if they're coming to you without rent and without damage deposit, is this somebody you want? And why is this happening? Well, I'm waiting for my damage deposit to come back from the other landlord. Maybe you should go over and look at that place and see how many holes there are in the wall, and how many picture holes, and how much paint, and how many scratches, and how many animals they had that you didn't know that weren't on your application. And maybe now you know why there's no damage deposit.
Kathy's on my thunder here. Oh, go ahead, Brad. I'll add in after.
Tenants like that are good for my business, not yours.
Yeah,
that's right.
There you go. We're painting in all different ways here. My best practice is same as Chris. Collect both. I collect the first month's rent first, but before I get possession, I have both those payments in hand. I just want the first month's rent first, and I do a deposit against first month's rent, because if they back out or something changes, I'm in a position where I can keep some of that to compensate until I get someone else in place. If you collect the deposit, damage deposit first, it is considered a deposit. Therefore, it has to be refunded because there's no damage since they haven't moved in. So you're kind of at a loss there. But Kathy kind of nailed it. If they can't afford first month's rent and damage deposit, once they get behind, they'll never get caught up. That's in my experience. And it's exactly, if you're willing to make a payment plan on a damage deposit before they even get to your property, how do you expect them to manage their monthly bills going forward? This is money. It should be paid up front. If they don't have the means to pay this, it's a red flag already. Don't go down that road. Yeah, and she says, I make no exceptions either. Exactly. What was that last one? Oh yeah. So this is a good one. I'll throw this one back at you, Brad. You have a 6-month lease. Can you increase that for the next lease? How often can we increase rent in Alberta, Brad?
And this goes back to read the act. And one thing we didn't talk about is the ministerial regulations. There's minor details that are written into the residential tenancies ministerial regulations that aren't in the act. Read them both. And that's why it is no matter what. And that's actually really clear in the act. Some things are hard to interpret. It cannot be raised more than once a year. So if they've been there 6 months fixed term and you're doing another 6 months fixed term, you cannot raise it. And then if you waited 5 years to raise it and then you raised it, you got to wait a full another 365 days before you can raise it again. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We're seeing Service Alberta get a little bit more punitive to landlords where they used to want to warn you and educate you. Now I've seen a few landlords fined for things that were not fined for in the past, and an illegal rent increase can be a pretty quick fine.
Okay.
Brad,
Whether it was malicious or not, it won't matter, I don't think.
Okay.
Brad, lots of people here is talking about the Residential Tenancy Act. Now, I have mentioned in the past, but you brought it up, so let's get it out there. There is the Residential Tenancy Act regulations. What is that, Brad? Explain that. There's another act within, there's a regulation within an act. So tell us.
So if you read the RTA, let's pick abandoned goods. The RTA says if the abandoned goods are under a prescribed value, you can dispose of them, but it doesn't say what the value is. To get that value, which is $2,000, you have to go into the regulations. The regulations are things that they can change a little bit easier than actually changing the act. So, for example, when we had our big boom 7-8 years ago, what a lot of landlords were doing to try and kick tenants out so they could get do a condo conversion or whatever their plan was they changed it from a 6-month notice to a 1-year notice for condo conversion. It was pretty easy for the minister to change the regulations, the minor little details. The regulations has some examples of notices, but basically it's only about 6 pages long. So it provides some finer details that then the act doesn't. So for example, in the act, when it talks about the reasons that you can terminate a tenancy, it actually really only addresses terminating an employee and, it escapes me, another one.
Another situation. Okay.
Yeah. But when you go into the regulations, it lists 6 different reasons, I believe it is, why you can terminate a tenancy. That'd be like the owners moving in, et cetera. So the point is, they really are both to read. This is the rule book, and this is maybe a little bit more the penalty book, the finer details of it.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the answer in here, look in the ministerial regulations, way less commonly spoke about, but still important to be aware of. And, I preach to every landlord. There's 2 things that landlords probably get tired of me talking about when I do presentations is read the act and take lots of pictures. If you're familiar with the act, and at every stage of what you do as a landlord, you take lots of pictures, move in, move out, mid-inspection, during repairs, whatever it might be, you'll protect yourself from a lot of unknown dangers that you don't even know exist until you fall into that trap or bump into something, because you may have a little bit more awareness because of it, or by luck of good photographs. Those are the 2 number 1 things you see the landlords to protect themselves.
Yeah, and we have all these documents up over on our Mighty Network. It's called Alberta Landlord Community.ca. I did not spell that right, so I'm rewriting it right now. But Chris, you kind of define that in a very simple way. I know we're in overtime, but I really like this conversation. When you talk about the Traffic Act, there's the Traffic Act and there's the regulations. And how do you? What's the metaphor you always give, Chris?
Well, just so people understand it, your vehicles, for example, we'll say, has to have headlights and taillights. Regulations say that it has to be a red taillight, a white headlight, and amber lights to the sides. So it tells you these are the things you have to have on your vehicle in the act, but the regulation says how that has to be applied.
Why? One's the why and the other's the how. The execute how to do it. Cool. Okay.
Or sorry, the other way around, Matt. The other way is it says this is what you must have, and the other one is, and this is how you're going to do it.
And to point out on the rent increase topic, there's a whole page in the regulations on rent increases. So if the landlord just relied on the act itself, they would have missed some finer details of there. So it's spend some time, give it a good read.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we even have the penalty book too. So some of these things are done wrong. They're right on our site. You can see the actual fine or penalty. So something to be aware of. So
Yeah.
you talked about answering one Facebook. Let's get a couple of Facebook questions answered. Chris, you brought this one up. So I think we've already touched base, but I'm going to give Brad a second stab at this, make sure we've really helped out this new landlord. This is Francis. I'm wondering if anyone would be able to clarify. I have served a 14-day eviction notice for non-payment of rent. In the lease agreement, it states that if the lease is broken and they want to end their tenancy, 1 month's rent plus damage deposit is owed, or this is like a penalty, if you will. If they fail to pay by the 16th and choose to leave, does this still apply?
Typically not. Now, what they're talking about there is what I would more often call a lease break fee. So hopefully, if there's any tenants listening, plug your ears. A lease break fee is a nuclear deterrent. It is very, very, very seldom is it applicable in any hearing, in any judgment. It's a scare tactic. It is to make the tenant think twice about breaking the lease. That's what it comes down to. The reason is the system is designed to make a landlord whole, not better. And a lease break fee is considered a punitive damage and arguably makes you better. So that's why it's not awardable. Now, a lease break fee can be negotiated. I have seen where many tenants agree to pay the lease break fee. They pay it. The landlord ends it, might get lucky and re-rent it right away, and the tenant doesn't come back. But if we filed a claim against the tenant, you're going to go after the lost rent that they owe you, the damages, and lost rent income, say, for example, on a fixed term, that you don't also get the lease break fee. Now, years ago, I asked a hearing officer, probably about 12, 13 years ago, I asked one hearing officer where, we sort of discussed the lease break fee. And that hearing officer told me that they'd only awarded it twice. And they couldn't even remember the circumstances why they awarded it, but probably because it was the lesser of the lost rent income. So that's something to be really careful of. Look at your lease. A good lease will say that you're responsible for lost rent should you break the lease and the lease break fee. I had one a little while back where it said, or the lease break fee. So we went into the hearing. We were asking for 3 months of lost rent income. Good tenant, good guy, no doubt about it. And the hearing officer said, would you guys like to talk about this to settle it? I said, sure, absolutely. So we were talking, and the tenant says, listen, we're confused why we owe 3 months because our lease says lease lost or, so we're choosing the or. So we only want to pay 1 month. They were right, but they offered to pay 2. So we quickly settled and said, great, we'll take 2, no problem. And done. So, but he would have been successful in the claim because it said or. So again, don't rely on that lease break fee. Keep it in there. It's a deterrent, but it will not be awardable. Or if it does, it could be the lesser of the amount that you would have been entitled to in lost rent income. Lost rent income is a whole show that there's so many complexities with that we could talk about.
Well, that sounds like the next time you're on the Shoptalk, Brad, we're going to be talking about lost rents and different scenarios, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that's one topic that you've got to really do it right in the beginning or you're going to lose down the road. You can't fix it after.
Okay. And just a segue on that lease break fee, definitely keep it in, definitely still use it. You can, if the tenant's willing to pay for it and you can enforce it just through email and just being part of the lease everyone's agreed to, go ahead and do it. All we're saying is if you get forced your hand, you're going into the court or RTDRS, that leg is no longer there to stand on. But in day-to-day business, most of us charge and do it all the time. So don't get rid of it just because.
A late fee is the same thing, not enforceable, but I'd still keep it in there.
Yeah, fantastic. This is what we got from Lewis. I will take possession of a place with tenants on a month-to-month lease. Previous owner will give them 3 months notice to vacate. If I want to keep them and offer them a fixed term tenancy with an increase on rent, any specific advice to do it properly, or is it as simple as taking them with those 90 days? Oh, and Brad, you and I talked about this on the show. So let's clarify the difference between 3 months and 90 days, because you, Brad, you educated me on that fact. There is a difference. And to finish up the question here and see if they agree to my new lease. So Brad, let's clarify what 90 days means and then help out Lewis here.
I really, really caution everybody to avoid ever using the term 90 days. It's 3 tenancy months. And most everybody that tells me, well, that's what I mean. Yep, that's what you mean. And that's what you're going to do. And you know that. but the person listening might go, oh, 90 days. Well, it's April 7th. I'm going to give 90 days notice. You have to be out on, July 5th, whatever it might be. I prefer to refer to it in 3 tenancy months. It might set somebody else up wrong. Now, the thing is, you're taking over the property, but it's going to, in my experience, it's going to be a continuation of the tenancy. For all intents and purposes, it is the continuation of the same tenancy. Now, in my experience, a tenant can almost never be compelled to enter into a fixed term, because once you've given them that right, that periodic, you've given up your rights, and now they're in a month-to-month or a periodic, it's pretty hard to, they can't be compelled to go into a fixed term. You can negotiate it. The only times that I've seen landlords successful in getting them in a fixed term that was upheld by hearing officer a year or two down the road was when there's an exchange of value. Listen, you're month to month, but I'll give you a rent decrease if you go fixed term. But I still necessarily wouldn't rely on that. Once they're month to month, they're pretty much stuck with us. So truthfully, my advice, give them the 90 days, 3 months. I just did it there.
Yeah.
Notice as the new owner for the current owner to give them the notice, and vacate, renovate, do whatever you got to do and start fresh. Because if you want them on a fixed term, it could backfire down the road, or it just may not be upheld. I had a hearing one time where the tenant was in a month to month. The landlord talked them into going to a fixed term. We then tried to terminate it based on that fixed term and non-payment of rent. And the hearing officer said, I won't terminate on the fixed term because they sounded under duress, but I am terminating under them owing the rent. And so, and then I think the hearing officer was right. I think the landlord did kind of push them into signing that fixed term. And had they not been behind on the rent, they would have been in a month to month at that point now. So,
and this 90 day or 3 month thing also applies to, let's say it's today, April 7th. You say, oh, damn, I forgot to give my notice of a rent increase. So you run over and you hand them the notice of a rent increase of $100. So you know what? April doesn't count because it's 3 months. So you've missed out. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. So April's not counting. So May, June, July. So August 1st now will be your first rental increase because you were too late because you have to have the 3 tenancy months. Am I right on that, Brad?
Correct. But you can give it on the first day of those 3 months, because so many landlords are afraid. I don't want to give them the increase the day before rent's due. So you collect the rent and you give it to them on the first. That's the best practice in my mind.
That's like 3 pro tips right in a row there, guys. That's awesome. That's some good information.
So if you make it the second, guess what? You've missed. It's actually
you've just blown another. You've added another.
You're looking at 4 month rent increase at that point.
Well, and you don't find out till probably the second of the month that they didn't pay, and you go, "Oh crap!" And now you've got another 3 months on top of it. So yeah, 3 turns into 7.
Okay, a good friend of mine, Art, is asking, what if they're refusing to leave after 3 months? What kind of process do I have to go through with the RTDRS?
So if they've been given proper notice and they fail to vacate, then it's under the Residential Tenancy Act, under failing to vacate at the expiration or termination of the tenancy. Then under that clause, we can get them terminated. So have to make the application, go to the hearing. The one good thing I find is the hearing officers are pretty quick to evict people, how many days they have to get out when they have either not left at the end of a fixed term or at the end of a proper notice, such as a 3 month notice because an owner intends to occupy it. They kick people up pretty quick from that, in my experience, because they ought to have known, they should have known, they had lots of time to get out. Yeah,
it's at least they agreed to.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, we did a little bit of overtime, 8:15 here. Fantastic. Brad, if people need to get a hold of you, they want to use you for your services. I know you guys have shops both in Calgary and Edmonton.
We do.
What's the best way to find you guys?
I'll Google off our website. I can give you my phone number. It depends. If you're in Edmonton, I typically recommend dealing directly with Charlene in our Edmonton office. In Calgary and anywhere else in Alberta more. So when we kind of Northern Alberta deal with Charlene as well, but with RTDRS, with the fluidity of service and the phone hearings, we can help anybody anywhere. It's myself and Blaine in our Calgary office. Just give us a call. We definitely can help out. A lot of times landlords will email, but I recommend getting on the phone. We can have a much more engaging conversation and get better clarity to what the situation is than sort of a slow exchange of emails. But and when I say to people, my cell phone, I've always got it with me. I mean, if I'll never forget one guy called me on a Sunday at about 9 o'clock, and he said, Brad, I have an emergency. I said, okay, what's your emergency? My tenant's 3 months behind on rent. Please, that's not a Sunday night at 9 emergency, but I don't mind after hours calls. A lot of times I'm out bailiffing. So if you've got a problem, I'd rather give the landlord advice, on a Tuesday evening so they know what to do properly tonight, rather than calling me Wednesday when they took a guess. And, truthfully, 9 out of 10 times when landlords call us, they end up not needing us. We pride ourselves in giving the advice to help try and solve it. And if it doesn't solve it, then you're set up better to be more successful when we do have to make an application. So yeah, no, give us a call. We're always happy to answer questions and help out any way we can.
It's awesome. Well, Brad, you're with Serv-it, your offices in Calgary and Edmonton. And I know that some of you get looking for bailiffs and you think, there was a post on one of our pages where we say, oh, there's no bailiff up in this area. Well, you know what? I tagged Brad in it, and Brad has a bailiff just about anywhere you need one. So stick with our preferred partners on this page, and we will get you the service that you need, guys. And that's what we're here for, is to complement and help each other out, get through this business. So
yeah, best partners in the business to make the job easier. It's all what it's all about. So let's wrap it up. If you guys don't know, we're on YouTube. Best way to find the show, findgreattenants.com. with an S, plural. And then we're also on Mighty Networks for all the guys or folks that don't know about it. It's like our own private, distraction-free Facebook, if you will, is the best way to describe it. That's over at albertalandlordcommunity.ca. And Brad and I were talking before the show about putting together probably some quick tip documentation, maybe some checklists that would help you guys out in some of these situations. So watch for that to come on the upcoming weeks and months. We'll have that information for you guys.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Brad, for being here. Appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you again. And Brad is one of our preferred partners for the page. So make sure you look him up and get a hold of Serv-it. They're your go-to. One of our 3 eviction specialists.
Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night.